Welcome everybody. We are not going to try and dazzle you with our PowerPoint skills today. The whole idea is to do a very quick introduction and then to hand over to Michelle to actually show you the technology. So the question is, why smartforms? And if you look at some of the research that's out there from Gartner and some of the other organizations, they say that more than 40% of a typical solution development time gets taken up by creating user interfaces. And some of our customers actually claim that that percentage is much higher and that it's actually as close as 80% of the time that they build up a solution is spent on building out user interfaces. So at K2, we sat down and we thought to ourselves, how do we help customers solve this problem? And the key thing for us was to make sure that we make that development experience efficient. And you know, when you write code or when you do something that generates code, you're obviously incurring a lot of hidden and direct costs in terms of both maintaining and creating those specific objects. So as a result of that, we went and we thought further than just simple forms and the simple forms environment that you have within your environment and said we wanted to create something that will allow for you to create applications. So anything that consists of a user interface and that has to interface with both intra and extranets and can tie multiple systems together typically needs to be able to leverage a forms technology. As a result, we created K2 Smart Forms, and if you look at some of the feedback we've gotten from our customers, you'll see that they're immediately starting to get value out of this. Our good friends at Accenture, who are working on the Shell project with K2, immediately started telling us that they're going to see a significant amount of reduction in time as a result of K2 Forms, and that the fact that they can reduce not only their development but also maintaining those forms for their users going forward. At STA Corp, which is a customer up in the northeastern part of North America, they've actually made a statement that they've actually started converting to K2 Smart Forms from doing their normal ASP.NET development, and that they've also seen significant improvements in terms of their efficiency. And then finally, I'd like to call to your attention our good friends at Kimberly-Clark, who have been a K2 customer for many years now and have been part of our beta program on the K2 Smart Forms. And they've actually moved their solutions that interface between SharePoint and SAP onto the SmartForms platform as well. And they're actually planning to integrate all of those using K2 SmartForms and the underlying K2 technologies. Now, we're going to talk a lot about K2 SmartForms in this demonstration. The most important thing to realize about K2 SmartForms is that it's really aimed at the power user and making it easy for folks that sit outside of IT and those folks within the IT organization to maintain and to control those forms and to incorporate data from various different systems. Now, before I dive too deeply into SmartForms, you have to understand that the forms technology builds on what we call K2 Smart Objects. Now, for those folks who are on the call who are existing K2 customers, you're probably well aware of K2 Smart Objects. I'll do a quick 30-second overview of what they are and how they work. The Smart Object technology allows you to pull data from different line of business systems into an abstracted layer, which we call the Smart Objects, and to then create an interface where you can tie that data points together. Now, once you've done that, you have the ability to then interface with those smart objects using various parts of our technology, including our process designer, but most importantly, this actually allows you to create forms that give you direct access to your line of business data in a very consistent and repeatable way. Smart objects is obviously a very big differentiator for us at K2, and that's one of the things that we allow you to leverage very aggressively within our stack. So once you've created your smart forms, you have the ability to create reusable components, which we call views, and those views can be compiled into what we call a form. And it's very important again to understand that the primary presentation layer gets exposed right from the smart object that you can then reuse in different applications, in your workflows and reporting, etc. Another important thing to keep in mind is that these views are actually created in such a way that you can go and dynamically create different interfaces based on steps that you are in your workflow or where you are in your application. And as your needs change across an application, It's very easy for you to maintain those views and then to have updates happen across multiple forms as you push those out into your various solutions. And again, Michelle will illustrate to you in the demonstration how these views and how these forms work. The result, obviously, is a very quick and a very easy solution. You get a quicker time to market and meeting your customer internally's needs, and obviously the maintenance burden around those forms that consume so much time usually in your application development is reduced significantly. You also have the ability within K2 to define specific states around these forms. That means that as you move through a specific process, you can go and have the same form with different state information show up. So a simple example would be that as you go through, for instance, an expense claim approval, and it has to go for a second or a more complex layer of approval, you can actually surface up different data from the initial approval and show comments or interactions from previous users using exactly the same form, but just a different state as the workflow executes or as your application runs its course. And again, Michelle will illustrate that for you guys in the demonstration. And then finally, it's also important to note that there's the ability for you to create rules within K2, and those forms-based applications can actually light up when users interact with the form. So you can go and define specific rules that prompt your users to have specific information ready, or to actually allow them to make sure that you stay in control of the behavior of a form as it runs through that specific application. So you'll notice that obviously there's a lot of capabilities built into our smartforms application that give it a very rich experience. Now, that's all good and well in the design experience and when you're running, but how do you actually deploy these solutions? Well, we've created a K2 package and deployment solution, which actually allows you to then take these forms as you've created them as part of your application and the smart objects, wrap them into a solution package, and move them from your development environment into a production environment, and to be able to make sure that you have a very high level of consistency as you go live with these solutions. And that again is a very critical thing for those folks who have to maintain these applications. Something else you'll notice today is our K2 Designer. The K2 Designer ships with a web-based design environment that allows you to not only create the forms, but you can also create your workflows, your smart objects, and various views from one specific interface. A couple of things to look out for obviously within all of this is the fact that we have the ability to control things like versioning. The forms layer is completely extendable. You can add controls and subforms. There's a search capability and validation. Obviously you can apply themes to fit in with your specific needs, and we actually support a mobile platform with the specific technology. So again, by creating the K2 smartforms, you're actually hitting different layers in terms of your needs around application development from a UI point of view very quickly and easily. Highlight a few examples for you before we break into the demo. The first is the ability to leverage existing data. So with the Smart Object Framework, you can obviously tie together information from those different line of business systems as I glanced over earlier. Now, out of the box, the forms actually support things like SharePoint, Dynamics CRM, SQL, Oracle, SAP, Salesforce.com, or you can actually go and create your own interfaces into the smart objects and then pull that data into a smart forms layer. So if you look at this specific example, you'll see there's data actually on a smart form represented not only from Microsoft Dynamics CRM but also from SAP and SharePoint. And K2 allows you to maintain that data through this user interface. And again, that's something a lot of our customers have been looking for and are actually starting to leverage very aggressively. The other thing that's important is if you're a large SharePoint customer and you're using SharePoint a lot, the smartforms-based applications you can create can very easily be tied into your existing SharePoint infrastructure. So again, this provides a very powerful layer on top of that and allows you to leverage your investment in SharePoint. Again, we're seeing a fair amount of customers doing that. What Michelle is highlighting there, for instance, is part of our case framework and how that uses K2 smartforms. And then finally, you can also go and create smartform solutions that support master detail solutions like purchase orders. So you have the ability to create forms that actually contain line items and composite data. Again, that's a big need for customers. They want the ability to go and create these more complex forms to use for things like line item creation solutions like capital expenditure approval, invoice approval, purchase order approval, etc. So hopefully what you've seen in this this overview is a couple of high-level points in terms of how you can use K2 and what K2 SmartForms brings to the table. But again, as we said at the beginning, I don't want to dazzle you with PowerPoint, which much rather have you guys actually see the technology and interface with it. So I'm going to ask Michelle to take over and to start demonstrating. I'll monitor the question and answer section, so if you've got questions, throw them in there. And then about 15 minutes before the top of the hour, we'll open up the lines if there's anybody with some live questions. So thanks for that. Michelle, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Glenn. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of walk through a quick example of what a smart form might look like in a end-user experience. And then I'm actually going to take our travel request here and show you in the Smart Forms Designer. We'll take a look at how that was built. And then at the second part of my demonstration, we'll actually start from scratch. And so we'll build out a very simple scenario of an employee management. So we'll manage employee information. So to kick off my smart form from an end-user perspective, I can host that link, if you will, inside of a SharePoint environment. So here I have my new travel request, and when I click on this, we'll open up a new smart form. Now the smart forms, as Glenn was mentioning, are mobile compatible, so you can open up the smart forms and see them on your mobile device. You can open it up in Internet Explorer, Google Chrome. We spent quite a lot of time making sure that the smart forms would be compatible across different layouts, if you will. So here I've got my smart form that we've created, and there are a number of sections here that we want to point out that we created from the design experience. The first being able to apply a theme. So we can see we've got our nice image up top. We've got different coloring applied to our elements on our form. Now each one of these sections that are highlighted are actually views. So as Glenn was mentioning, you can have reusable views, and those views can be put together on a form. So you can have a form that contains the composite elements of the views. So in our traveler details, we have this tied back to a smart object that has traveler information, as well as our flight information and hotel. You can also note, as with all smart objects and Active Directory, we're actually retrieving some information for Neil and applying that inside of the smart form itself. Again, using the smart objects and tying that to the different components or controls within the smart form design experience. From the project drop-down list, again, using smart objects, we're compiling or surfacing information from our line of business into our drop-down list. By clicking on that, again, you can see the interaction with the form, being able to populate information as it's relative to the project that's selected. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as a blank project. We can type some comments here. We'll just travel to headquarters, and we'll see that get carried forward. We can add a nice image as well if we needed to upload an image to our SharePoint site. We have an image upload control. And then, of course, being able to do things like date and time. So you can select dates, different controls as well. And then, again, the smart object populating the drop-down list. And, again, this could be a web service. It can be a database. It could be whatever is attached to that smart object. We'll just go ahead and put a window as our preference. And we don't need to fill out everything for this form. And again, I'm not trying to show you the workflow perspective, but really what we can see in a form. Now the next part of this is really the state. So Glenn talked about the different states in a workflow, how we can use one form, multiple views, and hide and show different capabilities in that form based on the state of a workflow. So I just triggered or kicked off a workflow using that form. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open up Holly and just show you a different layout or a different state of that same form. So we'll wait for Holly to receive her task. And we've got Holly's new task here, so I'm going to go ahead and open up that form. And again, we can apply the state relative to the form we just submitted. And now you can see we've also got a different tab. So you can do tabs as it relates to forms as well. We're populating the information relative to that request. You can see a different view. We don't have the comments in this section on our traveler details. Instead, we want to put it in our comments tab. So we can go to our tab, add a new comment. We'll apply that comment, and again, updating real time to that line of business system, being able to retrieve that into our form and surface that in the form as well. As well as at the bottom, we'll see our different options for approving the workflow. So again, we're using the same form, but we're showing and hiding the appropriate elements on the form as it relates to the different state in the workflow. So we can go ahead and approve that as necessary. And really that's what an end user experiences or sees from a forms perspective. Now, let's go ahead and walk into that design experience and see how we actually create those smart forms. So I've opened up my Smart Forms Designer. I'm actually using Google Chrome to manage or to build out my smart forms. Again, that compatibility across browsers that we've been working through. I've got different categories here on the left. So you can see on the left I can start organizing my smart objects, my views, my forms, to make them a little bit more manageable in how we interact or use them across our business applications. Because again, smart forms don't require you to use them in a workflow. They can be used as standalone in your business application or surfaced inside of your SharePoint environment. So here I've got just shown, I'm just going to close my left panel there to give me some room. This is actually the form we looked at in our end user experience where we had the two different components for the tabs. You can add tabs to your design experience. And again, at the top section allows you to add the tabs to your pages. Now each one of these sections that I'm highlighting, the traveler details, the flight details, again are different views that we've surfaced on this form. So on the right in my context browser you can see my different views and the controls associated to them. So I've got the main tab and I've got the comments tab. If I open up my main tab, you can see which views are applied on that tab. I also have the ability to add controls. So if I wanted to add that picture, which we added here in our travel request picture. Just below that in our properties section is where we can now specify the properties for each of the controls or views that we're applying to this page. And you can see we can hide and show the different elements or different components for our workflow. If we click Next, as everything in K2 is wizard-based, we can start seeing the different parameters. So at some point I might want to pass in a parameter so I can pre-populate the form. In our case, in our workflow, we wanted to pre-populate at the manager stage the traveler ID, the project ID, so that we can have that information showing to us as well as those different project drop-down lists. So you can pass parameters into your form as well as the serial number from our K2 workflow perspective. Clicking Next, we see different rules. So I can apply rules at the form level or I can apply them to the state, and again, the state of my workflow. And you can see the different rules changing on the right depending on what state I'm clicking on. We'll actually get into the rules designer and designing a form from scratch. I just wanted to make sure we showed you what we showed you from an end user perspective and what that looks like in our design experience here. So the next thing I'm going to show you real quickly is the different views. So we saw the form, which is really that composite holder of those different views. And of course the smart objects, being able to build those smart objects. So let's start at the smart object stage where we can actually look at the smart objects and edit and create those smart objects. In our case, from our traveler request, we have our smart objects. We can add different properties. We can add associations, so a traveler has travel comments, so those carry forward with our traveler. And from the traveler, we can now generate and create views. So let's go ahead and look at the views that were created for our traveler request demo. I'm going to go ahead and open up our traveler info view, and again, this is a reusable view. And the nice thing about the view is, again, it can be used standalone or as part of a bigger application, which we saw in our travel request demo here. So in this section of our view, we have the same ability to add and remove different elements. We can see on the right my smart object properties, because every view has a base of a smart object. We can also see the methods that are relative to that smart object, as well as some standard controls like the calendar item, checkbox, drop-down list, etc. And as I click on each one of these items, again, you see the properties that I can select. So for my project drop-down list, I actually am tying that to a smart object, and it's my project smart object. I'm applying the getList method, and I'm retrieving back the ID. And I want to show the project name. The nice thing about being able to display what you want to show on your drop-down list is you can now concatenate things. So maybe I want to show the project ID and the project name. So we can tie those together and show it as kind of an expression. So let's go ahead and build one from scratch now. Let's go ahead and start a new section here. Before I do that, real quickly, just to show you that these can be run standalone, I clicked on the traveler info, and again, it's just a link to a URL, and that URL now shows us that one section, that one view. We saw the traveler request page, which has all 3 views. So again, these can be used separately. They can be used surfaced inside of SharePoint and other business applications relative to traveler information as well. All right, let's go ahead and design a new form. So I'm going to go into my HR category because we're going to do something simple as it relates to employee details and managing those. I've got in my category of smart objects, I've got an employee. So let's go ahead and take a look real quickly at that employee. We've got my employee ID, some very simple properties like first name, last name, email, department, and region. I've also got some associations, so every employee has a department and every employee has a region. I'm going to show you how that association translates to when I build a form or a view. So let me go ahead and cancel from there. So we're going to use the employee as the basis for our view. So I'm going to go ahead and generate a view. Now there's 2 ways to start building in K2. You can generate a view, so I can use that smart object as my basis and generate and have K2 generate, or I can design one from scratch, and we'll do it both ways. First way, we're going to generate a view. So it tells us where we want to store these new views. So I'm going to go ahead and keep things organized, and I'm going to store them in my employee management views category. And I want to go ahead and generate an employee item and an employee list. And I'm going to prepend these with D for demo for today. I'm actually going to change the name of that to new employee. I want to be able to add a new employee. So we generate item types, so I can input parameters or input like a form, so I can input and read information from a form. And I also want to generate a list, so I want to be able to pull back information in a list format inside of K2, as well as an editable list, so I can pull back a list, but also have that an editable list, so I can create and update and delete items from that list. So I'm going to start from this basic level and just generate 2 views. So now I've got my views generated. Let's go ahead and have a look to see what those look like. Let's take a look at our new employee. I'm going to go ahead and edit our new employee view. And now I want to go ahead and drag and drop and show you what we can do for building a form. So first step was we generated a view. We can actually use this view already. It's ready to go. We don't have to do anything different. I just want to reorganize a few things. I'm going to go ahead and delete the employee ID and maybe the field for that, and drag and drop some items together here. So move my last name over. You can see how easy it is to just drag fields and drop the fields onto the canvas. No coding involved. Now if I wanted to actually make my email across both columns here, we can use our merge cell. So we merge our cells together. And now my drop-down list, in no way did I tell K2 to go ahead and create the drop-down list. However, it knew to create a drop-down list because I have those associations. So you can see my department ID. I'm going to go ahead and change my label to be department. And also my region label. And you can see from a K2's perspective, because I had those associations, and I meant to type region, there we go. We can go down into the data source for those and see it's tied to my region drop-down list. So again, K2 helped me because I had those associations to create that drop-down list for me relative to its appropriate data source. So in this case, I'm going to delete these extra buttons here of save, delete, load. Let me just go ahead and delete those real quickly. And delete and load. So we just have a very simple create. The next thing I want to do is I want to add some validation. So in my email, I want to go ahead and make sure that they're applying a proper email. So I'm not going to write any code for that. I'm actually going to apply a validation pattern. So for an email address, I need it to follow this pattern. And as you can see, I'm highlighting over that, and it shows me the regular expression. So there are a number of out-of-the-box typical regular expressions or patterns that we apply. You can also edit the pattern or even add a new pattern. So if you have a custom field that you have a specific way it needs to be submitted, you can absolutely apply that pattern. So we're going to go ahead and select our email address. And the next thing we're going to do is when we hit the Create button, we want to make sure that the validations are set and the first name, at least at a minimum, is the applied field. So I'm going to go into my Rules section for my Create button. I have a rule here. I'm going to go ahead and edit that. And now we get into that Rules section that Glenn was talking about, being able to highlight and really make your forms pop depending on what's happening or how your user is interacting with the form. So here I've got some rules that I can apply. In this case, when I click the Submit button or the Create button, I only want it to execute the create method when everything is valid and the form passes validation. So I'm going to select my condition. You can see it applies it at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and move that up. So if the form passes validation, then I want to go ahead and create. Let's go ahead and configure some of that validation. The first one of our methods or our requirements was to make the first name field required and maybe the email box validated and required as well. All right, so let's go ahead and finish that. We'll finish that form out. And now I can run the form. Now I'm going to use my little URL here just to show you that it does generate its own separate URL. So it is just a generated web page. So we'll go ahead and type a name here and fill out the email address. And you can see I filled out an invalid email address. So our rule is being applied. And we'll select our department and our region. So let's go ahead and create that. Now it would be really nice to see if we actually created that, so that's going to be part of our next step here. We also have an employee list. Let's just take a brief look into that. That was one of the generated forms. And you can now see we have Craig, the item we just added. So it would be really nice to see that in one form or one page. So let's go ahead and make that composite page that pulls in those reusable views. I'm going to go into my categories here, and I have a form category. And I want to go ahead and create a new form. We'll just call this employee management. We'll store it in our form section. We can check it in as well. And now, again, with the drag and drop capabilities, we can drag our employee list. And then we can drag our new employee. And you can see as I'm trying to drag it on the canvas, it's showing me what areas are available to drag it. So I'm just going to drag it below. And now we can go ahead and work with our theme. So if we wanted to change the theme of our appropriate page, we can change the style and themes. We can change the theme to maybe Twilight. And all of this is extensible. So if you have a custom coloring that you use relative to your company, you can absolutely change that coloring scheme and theme in this area. Let's go ahead and type our some information into our sections that apply to our form. So we'll just list all employees and also create. And again, as we saw earlier, we can see the views that are relative to this form. Let's go ahead and add some controls here, like a picture. Let's go ahead and add our picture for our page. I've already uploaded a couple of pictures, so we can upload an additional picture or choose one that we have already uploaded. And now we can go ahead and manage that as well. So we can set the height and the width of that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to 200 pixels by maybe 100%. So it goes across the entire way. And it's percent. There we go. All right, so we've got a nice layout of everything. Let's go ahead and add a rule. So now that we have everything seeing on the same page, we can see all the employees. When we actually hit the Create button, let's go ahead and refresh that employee list so we can see everything interacting as it interacts together. And so to do that, I'm going to hit Next and get into my wizard. Again, you can add a parameter, so we need to apply a parameter to this form. Here are my rules. I don't have any states in this form just now. I can add a rule. And so now we can select different templates or rules. So the rule I'm looking for is when a view raises an event. So it shows me the view, so I can select which views. K2 shows me which views I have on this form. So when my new employee selects the create method, then I'd like to do something. And in this case, I want to refresh my list. So we'll execute a view method. And it shows me it's a list, so we can do a list refresh. Very simple, very easy. All right, let's finish that out. And we'll run our brand new form. So we've got our picture, we've got our 2 sections, we've got the employee list pulled out. And again, you can do a search, you can refresh that list, as well as have our ability to add a new employee. So let's go ahead and add a new employee. And again, the same applies, our validation applies. And we can select our appropriate region and department and create. Now upon creating create, we want to refresh that list. And sure enough, we have our list refreshed. Okay, another step of this that I want to show is what if we want to pull up a pop-up form? It's a very common scenario. Maybe I want to double click on one of these lists and be able to edit or delete that user. So let's go ahead and work on that now. The first thing I'm going to do is just create a simple view. And this time I'm going to create a view. So I'm going to new view here. I'm not going to generate. So we'll just call this edit employee, and I'll put the D in front again. So we'll create an item view. And here it shows me what data source. Remember, every view originates from a smart object. So in this case, I'm going to grab and drag and drop my employee smart object. And you can see it starts showing me which field, so I can generate a field or a form or view. I can use the different buttons. In this case, I want to do it by hand, so I'm just going to grab the first name. It gives me a label and a text box. Last name. We'll also grab the email. And again, we want to go ahead and merge that. My department, my region. And now I want to use some buttons. So I'll grab the Save button. Again, this is going to be our pop-up to save and delete our employees. And that's it. Very quick, very easy. We've got a new form. Now let's apply that logic to our employee management form. Go ahead and edit that. And now it's really about applying a rule to this. So when we double-click that employee list item, we want to go ahead and do a pop-up. So let's grab our, when a view raises an event, and the view in question is the employee list. When it's double-clicked, we always, so we don't have a condition, we always want to do this, we want to pop up a form. And you can see we've got different categories of interaction. Navigation, workflow. In our case, we want to do some navigation. So let's go ahead and look at our smart form. And again, you can search for what we're looking for. So we want to open a view in a subform and execute a method. So what subform are we looking for? In our case, we'll pick our edit employee from our view section. And again, it helps to keep things organized. So we'll grab our edit employee view, and then we want to actually load the employee that we just selected. So we're going to grab the load method, and again, that's based on the smart object. So that smart object has a load method. And how do we grab the employee ID? So the first place it's going to look is the employee management form, which has the view of the employee list, which has the basis of an employee. So we can grab the employee ID. Again, it's very logical. The employee management form, the employee list, and the employee. Finish that. So it's all configured and ready to run. Now before I run this, let's go ahead and make sure that we can close the subform. So when we hit save, let's close the subform and refresh that list. So let's go ahead and add a rule here. So because we're in that subform, we want to go ahead and select, when a view So when we select a method on the view, K2 already knows that we have a subform opened. So we want to select the save method. When the save method is selected on our subform, we want to close our subform and refresh our list. Close our subform, select the view we're looking to interact with, and let's do our list refresh. And we can add another one for the delete, and I'll go ahead and do that real quickly. We'll grab our delete method. And now again, we want to close our subform. You can see there's quite an additional bits of rules that you can add to your forms, your subforms, etc. as you're interacting, and makes it really a robust application, whether you're using it in a form or otherwise. I'm sorry, using it in a workflow or otherwise. All right, so we've got our rules in place. Let's go ahead and see if this works. Again, we've got our form. Let's go ahead and click on our Tom and change his email address to be more appropriate. You can see we opened up the subform, loaded the data. Just change it to Tom. We can change our, maybe from North America. If we save that, we should see that change. So we do indeed see the change. Let's go ahead and delete Craig. And again, you can see that change taking place as well. All right, the last thing I'm going to show real quickly is the ability to do something like a cascading drop-down list. So in our section where we have our department and region, when I select my region, I want the appropriate cities in that region to be populated. Let's go ahead and quickly create that and show you what that looks like to be able to do something a little bit more complex with cascading drop-down lists. So we'll grab our new employee view. And in that view, what I'm going to do is grab a control. And I'm just going to move my create down a level. So I'm going to grab a label. We'll call that label city. And I'm also going to drag and drop a drop-down list. We've got our drop-down list. Now I want to set the data source to that drop-down list. We'll go to our properties section. And now it says which smart object do we want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my city smart object. And in my city smart object, I have the relationship set up between regions. So again, it requires obviously some familiarity with the smart objects. So I've got my city smart object. I want to show the city name. But this time, I actually want to filter the data, so that cascading. So we're going to depend on the region drop-down list. And we're going to join that region ID from that region drop-down list to the region of my city smart object. And that's essentially it. So let's go ahead and finish that up. And again, I just made a change to the view, but because it's a reusable view and I only have to make the change once, I can see that change in my form where I'm using that view. Again, makes it really nice. So again, I can select my drop-down list. In this case, I'll select North America. You can see it did a query back to K2 and selects the appropriate regions. I can select another region, and again, I've got different cities. So again, that nice cascading effect. All right, so at that point, I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to our PowerPoint and go ahead and ask questions, get questions answered as necessary. So Glenn, if you want to pop back on, please feel free to do so.